It's the bird emergency. I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. It's seabird time. Hooray, hooray. Too much seabirds is never enough. Following hot on the heels of the amazing work of Alini cataloguing seabird sounds, today, Professor Patrick Jodice. And he was elected in 2015 the chair of the World Seabird Union. Patrick, thanks for joining me on the Bird Emergency. How are you?
I'm great, Grant. Thanks for having me.
Now, Patrick, you're wearing several hats. You're sitting there at the university, in the university office there. You're at Clemson, but you also work for the feds. So let's clarify exactly who and what you do, and then let's talk.
Sure thing. So I'm a research wildlife biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, which sits within the Department of the Interior. So they pay my salary. That's who I work for. But I have a unique position where I'm also a faculty member at Clemson University. So I'm a full professor here at the university. The program that I'm part of at the federal government actually has about 40 of these programs around the country called cooperative research units. They're pretty unique, and we think they're really effective. So it's been a great position for me to be able to work both for the federal government and to have a spot here at the university.
I really enjoyed perusing your CV, Patrick. Thanks for sending me that. About 40 years you've been kicking around in conservation biology, wildlife biology, and most of that time you've been working in some way or another with seabirds and shorebirds. Amazing catalogue of work, I would say to you, if you were a rock and roll artist. How did you get interested in seabirds?
Wow, 40 years makes me feel aged and wise.
You can have the wise, and just remember that I keep telling myself that 50's the new 30. Let's go with that spirit.
So honestly, the plan was never to be a seabird biologist necessarily. It was one of those things that just happened along that trek that you mentioned, 30 or 40 years of doing something. It's been a wandering road to get to certain places, a lot of stops in between, and a lot of good mentors and partners along the way. And at some point, I ended up doing some work with marine birds, and honestly, it stuck. I actually did my master's work on terrestrial mammals. I did my master's work on a species called the fox squirrel down in the Big Cypress National Preserve in Florida. And so to transition to birds, it was a bit different, but I had the opportunity after that, working for the state of Florida, to do some work in the Gulf of Mexico, trying to understand the abundance and distribution of wintering common loons out in the Gulf. And that led me to start thinking about how birds function in the marine environment. Clearly, there are a lot of other people doing that kind of work. So I got excited by that literature and that world. And my PhD kept me engaged with marine bird work at Oregon State University, working on a threatened seabird, the marbled murrelet. And then I got to do some postdoc work up in Alaska on black-legged kittiwakes and pigeon guillemots, and have been able to keep my hand in marine and coastal birds ever since, and I'm grateful for it. It's been a great opportunity, and has provided a lot of opportunities for students as well along the way. And
apart from being a hands-on in the field researcher, you've also been lecturing and guiding some academic careers along the way. Seabird ecology and seabird behaviour leapt out at me there, Patrick. What kind of a lecturer are you? Are you a fun one?
I guess I need to check and see what the reviews say about what kind of lecturer I am. I don't get to teach really quite as much as I would like to. The position I have is primarily focused on research with graduate students and graduate student mentoring, also working with federal and state partners in agencies to do research. And so I teach about one class a year. I've often taught a course called Conservation Physiology, which I really enjoy teaching. It tries to blend both physiology and conservation applications. I've taught some ecology classes along the way. I do really like being in the classroom, and it's been challenging to not be doing that for the past couple of years. I'm looking forward to getting back in the classroom, hopefully next semester.
Now, I messed up the tease at the start of the discussion too, Patrick, in that we're talking and we're going to be doing a bunch of seabird chats because World Seabird Conference number 3 is coming up just in a matter of days. Before we jump into Petrels, just tell us what the conference is, how difficult it's going to be running it in this COVID time where everyone isn't heading to a swanky hotel and having drinks after a day full of presentations. And look, you got to tell us about the World Seabird Union too. Let's knock them both over right now.
Okay, let's start with the union itself. The World Seabird Union, or WSU as it's often referred to, is it's actually a pretty unique kind of organization. It is not an organization comprised of individual members who pay a fee. It is actually an organization comprised of other organizations. So when the World Seabird Union was created back in 2010, and I was fortunate to be part of the group that helped to get it up and off the ground to start with, that was one of the ideas was, let's not compete for members. Let's not compete for the precious dollars that people have and they're paying for memberships. Let's go in a different direction and let's build an organization of organizations. And what we were trying to do was to create a global network of seabird scientists, biologists, educators who could handle global problems. There are a lot of really great regional seabird organizations. And I'll name a few, and I apologize for not naming all of them. But for example, the Pacific Seabird Group has been around for coming up on 50 years. The Seabird Group out of the UK, the Australasian Seabird Group, who are our partners in building WSC3, which was originally supposed to be in Hobart in Tasmania. The African Seabird Group, who hosted the second World Seabird Conference. And I could go on and on. There are a lot. And we want to let them do their jobs. We didn't want to compete with those organizations, but we saw an opportunity to provide a network for all those organizations to be able to talk to each other a little bit better. And for the people who are handling some of the challenges of doing seabird science across ocean basins, across hemispheres and around the globe, to have an organization that kind of looked at issues the same way. So that's why the World Seabird Union was built, to try and do that. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that so far. So a big part of what we did was to host these World Seabird conferences. As you mentioned, Grant, this is World Seabird Conference 3. So the first one was held way back in 2010 in Victoria, British Columbia, with the support and help of the Pacific Seabird Group. And then the second one was held in 2015 in Cape Town, South Africa, with the support and help of the African Seabird Group. And then the third one, as I said before, was supposed to be in Tasmania a year ago with the support and help of the Australasian Seabird Group. But the World Seabird Union Board and our member societies held numerous conversations and discussions and opted to postpone and then reassess and reassess again. And here we are getting ready for a virtual conference next week to be held virtually on a platform, and not what we were looking forward to. But as I said in an opening address that I posted throughout the past year or two, as we've had these conversations, it was abundantly clear that everybody wanted to meet. And as much as we all wanted to meet in person, we realized that was not the best option. And we talked about postponing altogether. People want to talk about seabirds. They want to share their science. They want to share their ideas. They want to network with their colleagues. And we decided, as many organizations have, to go virtual as opposed to postponing and waiting another 4 years. So we are really excited for the conference for next week. Disappointed we're not going to all be in Tasmania together, but glad we're all able to get together and share it.
Mate, I'm a couple of 100 kilometres away from Tasmania across the water, and they're not letting me in. And Fortress Australia is happening at the moment. It was a wise move to set up the platform and have it as a virtual event.
Yeah, I agree. It's no comment on anybody's, many countries' decisions on how to handle their situations, but it did become really clear that we would have been in a world of hurt had we tried to hold this in person. So I give the board and the member societies a tremendous amount of credit for those really difficult decisions when we were trying to do it with a crystal ball. And as you just said, it's clear now that we made the right choice. But a year and a half ago, boy, it was not clear. And even when we made the choice to go virtual again, because we thought if we wait long enough, we can meet in person, those choices we felt we were making the right choice, but it's like, but what if we could go? What would that mean? And now we know we made the right choice. So again, all credit to the board members and the member societies for some long, drawn out conversations about what we should do. They made the right choice.
Now, Patrick, something that I've noticed, being a person who stands on the outside of the academic bird world and gazes in and is amazed at the volume of work that's being done. Bird people, you are fanatical and you put so much stuff out there. It's astounding, really. You are master communicators as a group. Has that been really fostered by all of the different seabird organisations and you're really collegiate, or has it been an accident?
That's a good question. The science communication thing has really impressed me over the past few years. So, one of the other things that the World Seabird Union supports is something called the World Seabird Twitter Conference, which I would encourage anybody who's on Twitter to take a look at. It'll be coming up in April or May. Again, we hold it every year. So I think we're coming up on World Seabird Twitter Conference 8. And I do think, and we were one of the first organizations, I believe, and Grant Humphreys can talk to you a little bit more about this, to hold that large of a Twitter conference. I think that Twitter conference really got people thinking about how to communicate their science in different ways and to different audiences. And some of the science communication ingenuity that has come out of that conference has been both impressive and fun to see. So I think that science communication part of it is due to a few different aspects of what we do, but I think that Twitter conference has really helped a lot. People using graphic novel style formats to communicate their science, the use of moving images and infographics and illustrations has just been mind-opening for how to communicate really complex ideas. And so I feel like that's been a big part of it. And I think that the people who participate in the Twitter conference, I don't want to say that it's turned into a competition, but I think every year some people are trying to up the ball. Hey, this group did this last year. Let's see if we can go one better. And I think it's all in good collegial networking of improving a rising tide floats all boats, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's what people are doing, not competing with each other per se, just trying to make it better. And in the process, I think, it's helped us realize how cool the science is that we do. I think we all know, we all feel that because we do it all the time. But when you get to see the general public respond to it, I think it has a lot of aspects that are really attractive to a lot of different.
You've got another advantage because seabirds are mega cool, but there's so many kinds of birds can be seabirds. Like, for instance, you talked about the loon, and the loon is just one of the best birds out there. But then you've got the murrelet, but you've got terns, you've got gulls, you've got plovers, pelicans. I think we can call pelicans seabirds.
Yep. Now that's one of those things where that needs to happen. That conversation and debate happens at the bar. You said before, what's it going to be like to have this conference virtually and not be able to? Those are the fun conversations you get to have in the hallways and afterwards. Oh, is a loon really a seabird? And there would be people who would say no, and other people would say yes. And there's no one answer to that. But those are unfortunately, the fun conversations we'll miss out on. Those really critical debates.
Oh, we can have one now.
Yeah.
Eiders, scotters.
Oh, the sea duck people. Now you're going to make the sea duck people mad if you call eiders and scoters seabirds. Now you're going to get us into a rift.
Well, it's one of the things that I just think is fascinating. And the line between shorebirds and seabirds, and yeah, it's great. I love it.
Yeah, we tend to, so we don't have a hard and fast rule. We'll kick somebody out because they're working on something that some people may not think is a seabird. But in general, we'll talk about seabirds as being birds that forage in the marine environment for all or most of the annual cycle. So a bird like a loon is a really interesting example that's going to nest on a lake somewhere. But then winters, a lot of them end up wintering in marine environments. Pelicans are another good one because brown pelicans are marine all year long, but the rest of the pelicans are not. They're breeding on inland lakes, and then some of them will winter in coastal areas. And then even within the marine bird group, we'll often refer to two different groups within that: coastal marine birds and pelagic marine birds. Yeah, so I've done a lot of work on brown pelicans. They've been a really great species here for me to work on in the southeastern U.S. A really important, iconic coastal marine bird of the southeastern U.S., but then also have gotten to work on some pelagic seabirds as well, like petrels.
Now, I want to ask you something else about WSC3. We know how it's going to happen, and we know when it's going to happen. Well, actually, we haven't teased the date yet, but we'll do that at the end. How many people are contributing, and are there any highlights? Is there anything that's going to be unveiled amongst the presentations for this time that's going to be earth-shattering and lead to monumental policy shift in some government somewhere in the world?
I wish so. I don't have the most up-to-date numbers. I'm sorry, I don't have those. But I can tell you that we're anticipating somewhere around, I'm going to give a broad number, somewhere between 300 and 400 participants probably. Now, it's a big number. We had about that many in Africa. We were hoping to have about that many, maybe a little bit more in New Zealand, but we're pretty pleased with that number. Now, not all those people will be presenting science. Some will just be attending, but I think we've got a pretty good turnout considering it's virtual. And honestly, the virtual platform is going to allow some people to attend that may not have been able to afford to get to Tasmania. And again, there are pros and cons to everything we do. We're just trying to make the best of it. And so we've tried to make it very affordable, especially for scientists in developing nations, and so I think from that perspective, we're hoping to have a pretty good turnout. In terms of earth-shattering science, boy, I don't know, because I'm not the one building the science program. I'm overseeing all those moving parts. There are always surprises. There are always papers and people presenting where you walk out and go, wow, I didn't see that coming. So I think just in general, we'll expect to see that. But you'll have to check back with us afterwards and see what we think the big hits were.
I'll look forward to that. And look, the key always is hopefully it's going to get something protected, get some practice stopped or some new practice begun, and some money into research. So hopefully it achieves some of it.
And I'm sure it will. Excuse me. And I'll tell you another thing about these conferences too. They do all those things that you just mentioned, but I think they really energize the people who go to them and the people who attend. I can speak personally. Every time I go to a conference like this, I come out with new ideas, because you're hearing new ideas, right? So you come out with new ideas, but I also just come out energized. I see the passion and the hard work and everything people are putting into their science, and it makes me want to do a better job at what I'm doing. And so there's that part of it as well. So aside from these hopefully very tangible outcomes that you just mentioned, there's just this energizing effect on the seabird community that everybody goes out there and recommits to what they're doing and works just a little bit harder and a little bit smarter. And I think that I know that's going to happen to most people who attend.
No doubt, no doubt. Now, there's a really good jumping off point. Let's talk about the seabird that you have most recently been working with, and that's the Black-capped Petrel, which is a resident, I think that's right to say, a resident of the Gulf. And of course, you're on the Carolina shores there. So you've been checking out a neighborhood petrel. Tell us about the Black-capped Petrel. Which group of petrels is it in, and what's its basic biology?
Okay, very good. So the Black-capped Petrel it's known as a gadfly petrel. It is endemic to the western North Atlantic. So when we say North Atlantic, it's anything north of the equator, not all the way up by Canada. So it's also one of the most endangered seabirds in the Atlantic. So currently we know of only a few nesting locations for Black-capped Petrels. They nest relatively high up in the mountains on the island of Hispaniola, which includes Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Most of the nests that we know of are in Haiti, which clearly is a country that's facing many challenges, both economically and environmentally. And then there are nests in the Dominican Republic as well. And we only know about 100 nests to date that we've located. And again, these nests are really hard to find. As with many petrels, again, they're nesting inland, up high in the mountains, in burrows that they either excavate or can use that are under tree roots or in between rocks. So they can be really hard to find. So the fact that we've only found 100 in some of these immense forests is not surprising. On land, black-capped petrels face a lot of different threats. Deforestation, habitat destruction and disturbance, introduced predators. All of these things are real challenges for black-capped petrels on land. And most of the work that's been done on black-capped petrels has occurred at their nest sites, trying to find new nests or protect those nests. The species was actually thought to be extinct and was only rediscovered in the mid-1960s. It's only been since that time we've really focused on trying to find more nests and understand what their habitat needs are at the nesting sites. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, myself and a few other colleagues and partners had the opportunity to start putting some satellite tags on black-capped petrels, and we did that. We put out 3 tags on black-capped petrels nesting in the Dominican Republic, and that was really eye-opening because although we had numerous observations of black-capped petrels from ship-based surveys, particularly in the Atlantic, the radio tag birds started to go to some slightly different areas than those surveys went to. So we started to see a bit more of an expansive range in the Atlantic than we were aware of. Most of the observations that people had of black-capped petrels from vessels had occurred along the western edge of the Gulf Stream, which is the major current that runs south to north along the east coast of North America or off the east coast of North America. But we started seeing petrels east of that, east of the Gulf Stream, out in what we would call more pelagic waters, big water. So that was really eye-opening. We've gone back and deployed some more tags since then, and even deployed some tags at sea. We did some at-sea capture work back in 2019, which was also pretty eye-opening and allowed us to gather some more individual tracking data. And then recently, through some vessel-based surveys that occurred in the Gulf of Mexico, we began to get a better handle on the birds' distribution in that marine basin, which is pretty important because the Gulf of Mexico, as many people know, has a high degree of oil and gas activity. So currently, the black-capped petrel is being considered for listing by the US government on their endangered species list. The species is considered globally endangered. And our work in the Gulf of Mexico will hopefully help those decision makers get a better handle on where the bird occurs and throughout which part of the year it occurs there. But the Gulf of Mexico, the northern Gulf of Mexico, now seems like it is or should be considered as part of the range for that species, where previously it really was not. It was unclear if they were in the Gulf or not.
Pat, how different is the conservation environment and the research environment between Dominican Republic and Haiti, who are obviously the 2 key nations for preserving and protecting this species?
They are different research and conservation environments, but they have some things in common as well. And I'll tell you, one of the most important things, and so I'm engaged a little bit with the on-the-ground conservation there, more from the research side of things, but I've got partners and colleagues who are doing way more on the ground there for conservation than I'm doing. Birds Caribbean is an organization that works there quite a bit. Environmental Protection in the Caribbean, EPIC, does a lot of work there as well. And there's really strong on-the-ground partnerships there with people at the community level. And that is one of the biggest things, I think, that everybody has learned and figured out, is that conservation for black-capped petrels, particularly in Haiti, needs to have this local connect. They need the local folks are excited about where those colonies exist. There's petrel. There's locally the species is known as diablotine, the little devil. There are festivals built around the petrel. There's a football club that wears petrel uniforms. There have been documentaries and movies done that have focused on that. And I think that understanding of local connection is something that is important in both the Dominican Republic and in Haiti, but probably even more so in Haiti. And then clearly the conservation scene is really different. There's been a lot more habitat disruption, destruction, conversion in Haiti than there has been in the Dominican Republic. But some of the conservation challenges occur in both. Nonetheless, feet on the ground is a really important aspect of conservation there, and having local partners is a really big deal. So again, there are some organizations that are doing tremendous work there to fight for the species and making a really big difference.
That's astonishing.
And it's hard to mention all of them, and I apologize for not being able to mention all the people who are putting a lot of work in that species.
I'm sure afterwards you can send me some info and I can put some links there for people to chase it up. I will
Yeah,
be
definitely.
loving. I'm going to be loving finding out about the football team, the Petrels. Go the Petrels. I love that. Do you think that there are more black-capped Petrels out there than were currently thought of? Or is it just that the geographical range that they get themselves into is larger than previously thought? Is there a good news story in your most recent work?
I think the good news story in the recent work is that the birds are occupying, the more areas they occupy in some ways, the better. It's you put all your eggs in one basket. If the basket breaks, you got a problem. So I think as we get a better understanding of where the birds are, let's say throughout the northern Gulf of Mexico, the more we understand where they are, the better job we can do from a conservation standpoint. So if we know they're in the northern Gulf of Mexico, we can begin to consider what those threats might be in the northern Gulf of Mexico that may not exist in the Atlantic near the Gulf Stream. So for example, the part of the U.S. coast that they're off of, that Gulf Stream area that I talked about, there's not a lot of oil and gas development there compared to the Gulf of Mexico, where there's a tremendous amount of oil and gas development. So if the Gulf of Mexico, the northern Gulf particularly, is part of their range, then we need to really think about that when we're thinking about conservation threats to that species. So I think that's a really important part of it. The numbers of birds that are out there, I think, is really challenging for us to get a handle on. So if you read the literature on black-capped petrels, the numbers that you'll see are 1,500 to 2,000 birds. But again, we've only found about 100 nests. There's more nests out there, and they're just really difficult to find. So for example, as I said, right now, all the nest sites that we know of are in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but there's suspected nesting in Dominica. So this group I mentioned before, EPIC, Environmental Protection Caribbean, has done radar surveys there and has had really positive data come back about the likelihood of petrels being at high elevations in Dominica. But yet we've not been able to find nests there yet. And there's also suspected nesting in Cuba. So I think if we can find some other nesting areas, that would be a pretty big deal. And that's part of the reason we actually tried to trap birds at sea and satellite tag birds at sea, because the hope was perhaps one of them would bring us back to a nesting area that we weren't looking at originally. Now, that didn't happen. Unfortunately, we still got a lot of good information and data. But that's one of the biggest things that people are still trying to figure out is, are there nests in places like Dominica and Cuba, for example? So more work needs to be put in there. And I think getting a handle on that will help us get a better handle on how many nests are actually out there and what the abundance of the species is.
Being one of the gadfly petrel groups, is it a bird that returns after dark to the nest site? So is it likely to be not noticed by locals? Because when it's coming to land, it's coming in when people are preparing their dinner and just doing other things. And I might be displaying my Western white privilege here, but I'm thinking that at dinner time in Haiti, at the higher altitudes, people are not gazing out at the sky looking for birds returning to a nest site. They're actually around the cooking pot.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Gadfly petrels, they come in a lot at night to avoid predators, for example. So the fact that they're relatively secretive in that way does not help with being able to figure out where they go. They're flying really fast up these forested river valleys oftentimes, or areas like that where there's not a lot of people. And so really difficult to just see them. They're not calling. They're not in a big colony. I talked before about working on brown pelicans, for example, which are big, obvious birds. There's a colony of 1,000. You can't miss them. They're not doing that. They're in burrows under the ground, so you could walk right by them and never even know it. So all of those things make it really difficult to figure out where they are. One thing that we did recently, along with some colleagues, was to try and build a better model of where they might be nesting. Looking at the information we do have from these nests that we've found, we published a paper about a year or so ago in the journal Bird Conservation International, creating a new model for nesting habitat to try and get a better handle on where people might be able to look and where we might want to focus conservation efforts based on that model. So the idea is that those models hopefully will always improve. The more nests we find, we can go back, we can rebuild those models, refine them, make them a little bit more accurate, and hopefully give us a better idea to where to look for nests. So I do think you're right. I think that make it challenging. I will say, so there was part of the reason they're suspected to be breeding in Cuba is because people have seen the rafting evenings just offshore of the southern coast of Cuba, and that's an indication that they might be hanging out waiting to go inland. Other prosolariids do that too. Shearwaters will do that as well, and so that's one of the reasons why we think they may be nesting in Cuba.
Let's come back to their sort of habits in a minute, but you mentioned threats in the marine environment, and we were highlighting oil exploration in the Gulf. What are the other threats to such a small bird out at sea? And then you mentioned pests. What are the main threats to the bird when it is on land?
Yeah, so the on-land ones are a little bit easier to document and understand. So we'll start with those maybe. And I'll give you a couple good examples that unfortunately are recent and somewhat devastating, not to be a downer on this. But anyway, within the past couple of years at nesting areas that we know of in Hispaniola, there was an outbreak of predation by dogs. So there are other predators as well. So mongoose that have been introduced on that island can be predators for petrel nests, which has been problematic. But within the past couple of years, there have been issues with dogs in some areas, feral packs of dogs, and they've wiped out a good number of nests recently. So that was problematic. Fire was another one. There was an outbreak of a fire that we lost a number of nests to. So those are events like that can be human driven, either directly or indirectly, or problematic. Petrels, like many, and not just black-capped petrels, but other petrels will do this. They'll fly towards lights, and the more towers that get erected, whether they're cell phone towers or radar towers, whatever they happen to be, they can fly into those cables because they're attracted to those lights. So that can be problematic as more of those are built. And then the big ones on land over time have been habitat destruction, habitat conversion, habitat disturbance, particularly in Haiti, where so much land has been converted to agriculture or harvested for charcoal. As these forests have been harvested, that's been devastating for petrel habitat. At sea, it's a lot trickier to figure out, to be honest. And that's one of the reasons that just knowing where they are, understanding the range is such a big deal, because once you know what the range is, then you can start to think about what those threats are. So for a lot of petrels, one of the major issues is bycatch in commercial fisheries, where they'll get caught on hooks as they're foraging for the bait that's on the hook. There's not a strong indication that's been an issue for black-capped petrels, but it is something we're trying to get a better handle on, getting a better handle on what their distribution is and when they're in those places. Are they overlapping, not just in space, but in time with what those activities might be? Knowing that they're in the northern Gulf of Mexico and that the Gulf has had and probably will have in the future some fairly acute oil spills, big acute oil spills, makes us concerned about damage from oil spills to the species. And then other marine issues as well, plastics and pollution are always things that we're concerned about. Those are things that we can now start to look at also at the nest site to see if we are seeing evidence of that at nests or in birds so we'll look at contaminant levels in birds as well. We're currently doing a little bit of work trying to get a better handle on mercury. We're looking at mercury levels in birds. It was a concern early on that they might have high mercury levels, so we're trying to look at that. But a lot of the marine threats are still being, I think, explored, and a big part of that is understanding the distribution.
Chemicals, the PFAS, are they a problem in the Gulf particularly?
So we have not looked at those in black-capped petrels yet. We actually just had a paper come out looking at PFAS and brown pelicans here in South Carolina. So it's funny you mentioned that. And then in the Gulf, there are PFAS throughout the coastal areas of the Gulf because of the different activities that go on there. Also, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are a concern in the Gulf. We've looked at those in brown pelicans. And I think over time, those are things that we can look at more in black-capped petrels, especially now that we know that they're in the Gulf and where some of those contaminants might be a little bit more concentrated. However, one of the things that we don't know about the birds in the Gulf is where they nest. We've tracked some birds. Like I said, we put some tracking devices, some satellite tags out on birds in the Dominican Republic. All those birds gone up into the Atlantic near the Gulf Stream. We've trapped birds in that Gulf Stream area that have gone back to Hispaniola and not gone anywhere else, but we have yet to track any birds in the Gulf of Mexico. So one of the biggest missing pieces we have right now is, okay, we know there's birds in the Gulf of Mexico, but where do they come from? And that's a pretty big piece of the puzzle that's still missing. So that's it's something we hope to continue to work on, but there's not one easy way to get that answer. We just need to keep tracking birds and hope that somebody leads us to the Gulf of Mexico eventually.
You mentioned that they're attracted to lights. Does that mean that the oil rigs are actually a threat to them at night?
I wouldn't go so far as to say they're a threat to them at night, but again, by getting a better handle on what their distribution is and knowing that they're in the Northern Gulf and knowing what parts of the Northern Gulf they're in, we can then look at their overlap, at least spatially, with things like oil and gas platforms to know if they're nearby those platforms or not. And we're actually working on a paper right now. My lab is to do just that, not just with black-capped petrels, but with other species in the Gulf to get a handle on what that spatial overlap is with those oil and gas platforms. And once we know that, then we can take that next step and say, okay, gee, they're not really near those oil and gas platforms, probably not a big deal. Or, hey, they're actually near a lot of those platforms. This might be something that we need to begin to look at. Because if you do have a bird that interacts with a structure at sea, or maybe is affected by an oil spill, it's not easy for us to get those. Yeah, I think one of the important things is that as we get a better handle on the distribution of marine birds in a place like the Gulf of Mexico, whether they're petrels or other species, then we can begin to really dig into the question of might they be overlapping spatially with these oil and gas platforms? And if they are, then I think we can begin to look at that in more detail, because it can be challenging for us to be able to document those interactions at sea, where you can't go find a carcass on the ground under a tower like you can on land. And so I wouldn't go as far as to say, yes, that's a threat, or yes, that's a problem. But I would say we're exploring the spatial overlap between platforms and petrels. And that's the first step in answering that question. If there's spatial overlap, then okay, let's take the next step after that to figure out if there might be attraction or not.
All right. So yes, that one of the biggest challenges we have in seabird conservation, not just for black-capped petrels, but for any species, is the challenge that you just described, is a species that nests in one or a couple of countries maybe, but then resides or shows up in the exclusive economic zones of many other countries, sometimes halfway around the world. So black-capped petrel is an interesting example, as are many species in the Caribbean, because there are so many nations so close together throughout that island chain. So I believe that for black-capped petrels, we have documented them as occurring in, I think it's about 15 different exclusive economic zones in this part of the Western North Atlantic. And as you said, that's quite a wide range of types of countries. So I think there's a couple things that I think are important in terms of those conservation steps. One is on the ground partnerships. And one of our member societies, for example, Birds Caribbean, they're very active throughout the Caribbean in doing just that, making sure that they have partners in Cuba and partners in Haiti and partners in Dominica and partners in the Dominican Republic. And then all of those partners can come together, usually in a more focused working group. So in this case, the Black-capped Petrel working group includes partners from all those nations, where they can each represent their own nations, but then work together towards the conservation for this particular species. So the Black-capped Petrel is a really good example of that, but this is happening around the world with these seabirds that are, again, nesting in one country, but visiting many others just in the period of a couple of weeks. And that's how they're different than just migratory birds in general. So you think, oh, a bird that nests in Canada ends up in Costa Rica for the winter. Okay, that's a once a year transit, and that's really important. And there are conservation challenges to that. But with marine birds like the petrel, they might visit 7 or 8 or 9 different economic zones in one foraging trip over a 2-week period.
Are you encouraged by the development in the networks that NGOs and governments are establishing to protect seabirds?
Very much. And this was going on, before the World Seabird Union came on board. I would like to think that we've helped to promote some of that, and that by being a global voice, we can sometimes provide a bigger picture context than maybe just a small local organization can. But again, this was all these organizations, these member organizations that I spoke about earlier, they were all active before we came on board. And so groups like Birds Caribbean, in terms of the Black-capped Petrel work, are playing a huge role in building these on-the-ground partnerships. And again, not just for Black-capped Petrels, but for other species as well. And that's where the rubber meets the road, is in these stakeholder groups that include not only members from the big countries like the US that maybe have a little bit of money that they can put towards something, but that have people on the ground going to a community in Haiti to put on, a festival about petrels. We can't do that. We need on the ground people who can do that, who have credibility in that community, who will be listened to by those folks. And then we can provide what it is that we can provide: some scientific expertise, hopefully some financial backing, some other types of support. But it's groups like our member societies, like Birds Caribbean, for example, that can get on the ground and really facilitate that.
The heroes of conservation really are those local people, aren't they? Whether they're building fences to exclude predators, whether they're performing tasks like the forest rangers in the Philippines, looking after the Philippines eagles, or local people with just clearing invasive weeds, things like that. They're the real heroes of all the conservation efforts that we see.
They are, and they're often not getting paid what I'm getting paid to do my work, to be quite honest. I'm fortunate to be able to have my office and the resources that I have. And I hope that, as with many of the folks in the World Seabird Union, that we can use those resources to support those efforts. But the folks who are on the ground in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, in a lot of these other places, they're the ones who are dedicating their time, their sweat equity, probably their own limited resources to try and benefit that species and that ecosystem. And without them, we've got nothing. I think one of the things that the World Seabird Union really supports, and that our lab has tried to do wherever we go, is to do some capacity building along the way. So there are people who are on the ground doing this work, but there are certain expertise or skill sets that they may not have, like how to deploy a satellite tag and collect those data and use those data to create range maps. Well, we can do that. So what we've always tried to do is not just show up and do the work and leave, but show up, do the work, and teach them to do as much of that work maybe as they can within reason, and then continue that partnership into the future. And I think not just us, there are a lot of other groups and labs that do this, but I think that is really the way to do that kind of work. And it's incredibly rewarding personally to see people that I started working with 10 plus years ago through these capacity building efforts who are taken off and built their own research programs. And that's what we don't need it to be the US folks showing up and saving the day. We need it to be us showing up, providing support, and getting them up to speed where they need to be up to speed to do that work, and then continuing to support them in the future as they grow in their own programs.
Technology transfer, that's what works. And standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Yeah, I agree.
And there we go. Too much seabirds is never enough. Too many cliches are never enough. Pat, that's probably a nice point to go back and just tell people where WSC3, the World Seabird Conference number 3, is actually going to be taking place. You can have the honour of sharing the web address for the portal for people to get involved.
Sure. So there's two places you can go for the conference itself. You can go to worldseabirdconference.com, and there's plenty of information there that'll help you find it. For the World Seabird Union activities in general, you can look at seabirds.net, and there's always a lot going on there as well. But for the conference, check out worldseabirdconference.com, and all the registration information, the program at a glance, the virtual activities that will be occurring in the evenings, the socials, and open mic nights and such, all described there.
Terrific. Now, Pat, we're going to get to the fun bit, the bit where we get to know you a little bit better. So are you ready?
Go ahead.
Patrick, when you're out in the field, what's your field guide of choice?
Wow, a tough, hard first question right off the bat.
60 Minutes has got nothing on me, buddy.
So I often carry the National Geographic Field Guide here in the U.S. When I get to travel to other places, I try and talk to the folks who live there and see what field guides they think are best. Honestly, I'm not a big field guide person, and I'll throw another one out there for you as well. I'm not a birder. I might be a bird researcher or an avian scientist or whatever you want to call it, but I've never considered myself a birder. I'm not that good. I admire those who are, but it's never been my thing.
Oh, I'm not even going to bother asking you if you keep a list. I think we know the answer to that one. But I will hit you with the other hard-hitting bird question, Pat. What's your favorite bird?
Wow. See, that's another one. You got all the hard ones ready to go.
Man.
I know. Probably the stock answers. I don't really have a favorite bird. I do have some species that are near and dear to my heart who have meant that as a species have meant a great deal to me over the years. And I think when you get to work with species, they take on a whole nother aspect. And when we were chatting before, we mentioned loons. I always had loons have always been a great deal to me. It was the very first job I had as a wildlife technician was working on common loons up in northern Maine. So I've said to many people, any day you get to see a loon is a good day. So loons have always been pretty high up on the list. And because of all the work I've gotten to do with brown pelicans here over the years, I've really grown to enjoy and love that species. They're just so cool. And I was just talking to a friend just yesterday about getting to sit on the beach and watching them fly in formation low over the water. Boy, there's nothing like that. They're really cool. So, yep, big pelagic species that can wander thousands of kilometers, also cool. But man, I can sit and watch pelicans fly in formation and forage all day long.
I had a little bet with myself, and I thought that you'd be having a tug of war between the loon and the penguin. So, the pelican, beg your pardon. I'm glad I got that one right.
There you go.
Now, not being a birder, we'll extend this question out a little bit more. Pat, where's your favorite place to go? Usually I would say bird watching or whatnot, but where's your favorite place to put yourself in amongst nature?
So right now where we live in South Carolina in the U.S., we're in the far western end of the state, pretty close to the Appalachian Mountains, the southern end of the Appalachian Mountains. And there's a national forest not far from here called Pisgah National Forest. And when I get a chance, if I'm going to play hooky from work for a day, and my grad students and folks who work with me know, that's often where I'll end up going. I'm not a birder, but I do a lot of mountain biking. And a day that I really look forward to is a day where I can put my bike on the back of the truck, drive about an hour and a half up to Pisgah, and get to mountain bike for the day up there. And man, that's a good day.
So does that mean that you've mountain biked the Appalachian Trail?
Oh, God, no. A few hours at a time, and I've gotten to go to some different places, but I'm on my mountain bike regularly throughout the week. And and Pisgah is just the southern end of the Appalachians is just a really cool area. A lot of cool waterfalls. It's a water-driven area. It's just really neat from that perspective. A lot of high biodiversity for aquatic organisms. But man, something about being up in those mountains is pretty fun. And so the coast is about 4 hours from where I am. Otherwise, I'd be talking about some beaches somewhere, some remote islands that we get to go to, which for work we do, which is cool. If I get to skip out for work on Thursday of this week, perhaps, Pisgah could be a place where you might find me.
So what's your sort of bucket list location? If let's assume the pandemic never happened and you could just go anywhere in the world at the moment, where would you go to do some wildlifing?
So I've never had the chance to do a safari in Africa. And being in Cape Town for a little bit, I'd hoped I could do that, but time just didn't allow. And so that's something that would be a great thing to do, just to see that ecosystem would be incredible. I've come to really enjoy some of the smaller islands I've gotten to go to for research that I never knew existed. A lot of us know the big islands, but a lot of those big islands have small islands off of them that a lot of people don't know about. And getting to see those and spend time on those has been that's a real treat. And as you talk to seabird biologists, seabird scientists, I think that's one of the things that keeps some of those folks going back is some of the cool places we get to go and these really unique, interesting local communities that host us that make our work possible, that support us when we're there, and getting to know those people has been just a real treat.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those small islands in the Caribbean, and I'm looking forward to getting back to some of them.
One of the benefits of being a researcher, because it's certainly not earning the big bucks.
The travel, when we get to do it, the travel is a big part of that, the places we get to go and the people we get to work with. Because as you said before, you're going to these places that are all really different, that have very different cultures, and you're relying on them to host you and support you. And so getting to be accepted by those communities, getting to learn about those communities, getting to show them part of their environment that maybe they haven't quite understood or gotten an opportunity to really see has been really rewarding. And yeah, it's just some of those places are just, they're cool to be.
That's right. That's right. You mentioned that you haven't been on a safari. So would your bucket list bird/animal be an African?
So one of the species I haven't gotten to see that I thought would be cool to see would be a hornbill.
Oh,
I'd really like to see hornbills.
pretty astounding. You'll have to go to Asia or Africa certainly to get a really good chance of checking one of those out.
Yeah.
Have you sort of got rough plans, pandemic depending and all that kind of thing, but to get to Africa in the next handful of years?
Not really. I do have a colleague who has led some tours there, actually somebody who was part of that Gulf of Mexico team doing the survey work there for Petrels. And so he's always said, whenever you're ready to go, let me know and I'll help you put something together. So, hopefully in the future, that'll be the case. I think most of our plans for now are trying to figure out how to get back in the field to do some of the research that we haven't been able to do in the past couple of years. We've been able to do some, but more international work has been put on hold. And so trying to get back to some of that is a little bit more on the forefront.
Pat, I'll hook you up with one of my other podcast friends. I do a podcast with him, and when the pandemic isn't on, he runs tours to Kenya. So I'll hook you up with him.
Happy to have the reference.
Yeah. When you're doing field work, what's your most essential piece of kit? It can be as high-tech, low-tech, whatever, as you like. But what can't you be without when you're in the field?
I think if I didn't give this answer, my students and others would give me a hard time. So I would just have to say it was the hat that I choose to take in the field with me. And it's just with the squishy hats from Australia. Have you seen those? They're leather, full round brim leather hats. You can roll them up, handle the water really well, and so that's the hat of choice. There's some pictures of me out there on the web wearing that hat. Okay,
I'm amazed at how many people don't say hat as their answer to that question, because that's right. We can't be too careful, can we, Pat, with our delicate pate?
I will say, I'll say one other thing about the hat real quick, and that's a former colleague of mine used to give me a very hard time because she would say my hat was not functional. She said, it might look good, but it's not functional because it doesn't have a chin strap and it could blow off on a boat. And I would just say, yeah, but it never has. So, it's fine. And I always said that her hats were functional but dorky looking. So I felt like that was just an ongoing conversation we had about the hat.
Fabulous, fabulous. I imagine being out in the field with you, Pat, would be a bit entertaining. Thanks, Pat. You've successfully negotiated and survived the bird emergency.
You made it easy.
Thanks for telling us about the Black-capped Petrel and, of course, WSC3, which kicks off in just a matter of days. And if you're into seabirds, get involved or check out the fruits. Afterwards, hundreds of participants, a mountain of academic goodness. Going to be wild.
We're excited. It's been a long time building it, and credit to so many people behind the scenes who have worked countless hours to put this together for us and for all the participants. And so we're really looking forward to it. And you know what? We'll start planning the next one as soon as we can once this one's over. And then the Twitter conference in the spring is a big deal too. So keep an eye out for that.
That's the way it goes, isn't it? As soon as you get one task done, there's another one presented for you. But Pat, I'd like to just say thank you, and as a representative of the seabird community, for putting so much stuff out there and really raising awareness of the challenges, the threats, and the amazing biology of seabirds, shorebirds, and all those ones that we don't know what to categorize them as just yet. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Grant. Yeah, thank you, Grant. And thank you for what you do too. There's a lot of us out there doing science, and we can write our papers and put them in academic journals. But we are really grateful for the kind of work that you do, for your podcast, for helping us communicate the science that we do to everybody else that's out there. Because without that, if it doesn't go anywhere, it's really not that important. So we really appreciate the kind of work you're doing as well.
I'm just lucky to get to pretend I know what I'm on about. But if on that note, Pat, if people like the show, or if you're a researcher and you've got something that you would like to tell me, hey, I'm on Twitter at Bird Emergency, not the Bird Emergency, at Bird Emergency. But you can send me stuff, Grant at thebirdemergency.com. And the simplest thing you can do to help spread the message is share, retweet, subscribe to the show, and share it to your seabird buddies. Professor Jodice, thanks again.
Thank you, Grant.